Are you really going to decide who to spend your final years with just because you do not want the house to feel empty? That is where so many people fall into the most expensive trap of old age, because a bad living situation in your 60s does not just steal your patience. It steals your peace, your independence, your money, and even your desire to get up in the morning. You do not need just anyone nearby. You need clarity so you do not end up living with someone who throws your life into disorder, invades your space, or turns you into a burden inside your own home when this was supposed to be the stage of life where things finally got calmer. Stay with me. Gabriel here. Welcome to the Stoic Garden. Today we're going to walk through 8 essential points for deciding who to live with in old age when you do not have a spouse, without cheap sentimentality and with both feet firmly on the ground. By the end, you will have a much clearer view of how to protect your peace, your dignity, your assets, and how to choose company that does not take away your freedom, but helps you preserve it. Let's begin. 1. Define your real priority. Peace, independence, and security before companionship. Let us start with what almost no one wants to admit, because it sounds ugly, cold, and unromantic. But in old age, the one who wins is not the one who is most surrounded by people, but the one who lives with the most peace. There are people surrounded by children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, neighbors, and noise, and still they live tense, watched, drained, and without a single minute of real calm. And there are also people who spend more time alone, yet they sleep peacefully, manage their own time, protect their energy, and hold on to something worth more than improvised company: the dignity of still being in charge of their own lives. Many people reach this stage with a dangerous idea lodged in their heads, as if growing old meant accepting any living arrangement as long as they do not end up alone. And no, that is not wisdom, that is fear dressed up as necessity. Because one thing is sharing a home, and something very different is handing over the wheel. The problem does not begin when someone enters the house. The problem begins when, out of terror of silence, you bring into your space someone who alters your schedule, has an opinion about everything, moves your things around, questions your habits, and makes you feel like a guest in the place you built. This is where it helps to stop and think with your head, not with the emotional emptiness of the moment. What do you truly need at this stage of your life? Conversation at any cost, or stability that does not drain your soul? Because peace is not some luxury for odd people or a quirk of a demanding old person. Peace is a practical necessity. If you have more years behind you, less energy, and a greater need for order, then every unnecessary conflict weighs twice as much. What you once tolerated out of obligation now takes its toll on your body, your sleep, and your state of mind. Seneca, who was certainly no naive sentimentalist, left behind a brutally useful idea when he warned that it is not that we have little time, but that we lose much of what we have been given. And that hits harder in old age, because you are no longer in a season of life where you can waste years solving other people's dramas at your own dining table. You are no longer here to turn your home into everyone else's emotional emergency room. When you understand that, you start to value each day more seriously. You stop asking who is with me and start asking who does not throw my life into disorder. Independence does not mean foolish pride, or that old stubbornness of refusing help even while you are falling apart. It means something much smarter. It means preserving the ability to decide your own schedule, your space, your habits, your silences, your visitors, your money, and your rest. Because the moment that disappears, living together stops being support and becomes elegant submission. And of course, some people sell it as family love, as closeness, as togetherness. Yes, very nice until you can no longer eat when you want, rest when you need to, or close your door without someone taking offense as if you had declared war. And then there is security. That boring word no one puts first because it does not sound emotional, but it should be at the very top of the list. Physical security, financial security, emotional security. It is not enough for someone to keep you company. It also matters whether that person brings stability or moves you closer to conflict. It matters whether they respect your vulnerability or use it. It matters whether they help you keep the household steady, or if they arrive with that special talent for complicating everything and then playing the victim on top of it. Because there are people who do not move in to coexist. They move in to set up their chaos. And you already have enough to deal with from your back, your blood pressure, and your pills, without also adopting full-time human problems. There is a cruel irony in all of this. Many people spend their lives working so they can finally have a quiet corner of their own, and just when they should protect it the most, they give it away out of guilt, habit, or fear of being judged. As if saying no were a sin, as if wanting order were selfish, as if needing silence were excessive. No, dear friend, what is excessive is ending up pushed into a corner in your own house so others can feel comfortable while you learn to disappear slowly and politely. That is why the first decision is not who you will live with. The first decision is what you are not willing to lose. If you do not define that clearly, anyone with a smile, an urgent problem, or an emotional speech will pull you off center. And when you lose your center at this stage of life, getting it back costs far more. So start there. Before you open the door to someone else, make sure you have not already closed it on yourself, because the best company in the world will never make up for a life without peace, independence, and security. 2. Evaluate your health, your money, and your energy to decide what kind of living arrangement you can actually sustain. This is where the theater of good intentions ends and concrete reality begins. Because one thing is the life you would like to have, and something very different is the life you can truly sustain without breaking yourself. There are people who make living arrangement decisions as if they still had the same strength they had 20 years ago, the same patience as before, and the same financial margin they once enjoyed. And then the problems come, because fantasy always charges a high price when it collides with the reality of the body, the bank account, and accumulated exhaustion. Your health matters more than many people admit. Not only if you have a serious illness or a visible limitation, but in simpler and more decisive things like how much calm you need to sleep well, how much noise you can tolerate, what level of help you need day to day, and how much stress your system can handle before it starts taking a toll. Because living with someone is not the same when you still have mobility, independence, and good stamina, as it is when every change in routine throws off your medication, your rest, or your mood. And no, that does not make you weak. It makes you aware, which is much more useful. There is also money, that subject many families handle with remarkable hypocrisy. Everyone talks about love, togetherness, being there for each other until the expenses show up, the bills, the repairs, the groceries, the medication, and the utilities. That is when the truth comes out. Living together without financial clarity is opening the door to slow, silent, poisonous resentment. Because if you pay more, if the other person contributes less, if nobody says anything and everyone just assumes, sooner or later the discomfort appears. And when it appears inside the home, it does not stay in the numbers. It seeps into the tone of voice, the long faces, and those small humiliations some people toss out as if they meant nothing. Ask yourself honestly how much you can sustain without becoming dependent or without turning into someone else's required provider. Because there are older people who are not just looking for company, they are financing someone else's living arrangement without wanting to admit it. Suddenly the son needs some time, the niece is strapped for cash, a relative wants to help, but just happens not to be able to contribute much. And in the end, you are the one providing the roof, the food, the utilities, and the patience all included. An emotional hotel with full board, and on top of that, you're supposed to feel grateful that you are not alone. What a bargain. Epictetus taught something that still feels like a slap of clarity 2,000 years later. He said it is not events that disturb people, but the judgments they make about those events. The old master, who went from slave to guide, knew that the first deception begins in the mind. When you tell yourself it is fine, I can handle everything, this will probably sort itself out, many times you are not being noble, you are avoiding looking directly at what is obvious. And what is obvious is that a badly calculated living arrangement wears you down more than solitude that is well managed. Energy, too, is the factor people talk about the least, and yet it is one of the most decisive. Because it is not enough to be able to pay or to be somewhat stable in your health. You also need inner fuel to tolerate conversations, differences, other people's needs, daily friction, and all the invisible management that comes with sharing a home. Do you really have the energy to live with someone every single day? Or are you fooling yourself because silence scares you more than exhaustion does? There are people who do not need to live with anyone. They need to learn how to stop running from themselves. And that difference changes everything. Sometimes the best decision is not permanent company, but some middle ground arrangement. More outside support, less inside invasion. More organization, less entanglement. Maybe frequent visits. Maybe occasional assistance, maybe someone nearby but not on top of you. Because living together is not a moral obligation or a reward for growing old. It is a life format. And not every format fits every season. What is absurd is trying to force your current reality into a mold that no longer belongs to you just so you can seem normal to others. Massimo Pigliucci, who has managed to translate Stoicism into the language of today without turning it into a self-help pamphlet, points out that tranquility does not come from eliminating problems, but from adjusting our expectations to reality. And that is the point. You do not decide well when you are dreaming. You decide well when you look at your reality without makeup. Your real body, your real budget, your real temperament, your real need for silence or support. That is not pessimism. That is self-respect with a bit of math, which at this age is far more useful than badly managed enthusiasm. So, before you think about who you are going to live with, measure with brutal honesty what you can sustain without losing your stability. Because a decision made from fantasy leaves you trapped. A decision made from truth, even if it is not the sweetest or the prettiest thing to talk about at Christmas, is usually the one that best protects your peace. And at this stage, protecting your peace is not a whim. It is adult intelligence. 3. Choose to live with someone who respects your boundaries and your routine, not someone who invades them. This is where many people get it wrong in an almost childish way. They think someone is a good option to live with because they are affectionate, because they call often, because they seem available, or because they have that social gift of making you feel loved over an hour of coffee. But living together is not decided over a pleasant conversation after lunch. It is decided in repeated details, in routine, in daily respect, in the way someone treats your space when they are no longer performing to make a good impression. That is where the truth comes out. Because one thing is visiting and another is living there. Visiting is easy. People arrive groomed, smiling, soft-spoken and polite. Living together, on the other hand, reveals the invader who comments on what you eat, touches what you put away, changes your schedule, brings people over without warning, turns your living room into shared territory, and then looks at you as if you were overreacting for wanting order in your own home. And of course, when you protest even a little, the favorite phrase of everyday manipulators appears, "You have such a temper." No, not a temper, a boundary. And that bothers many people because it ruins their little party of using your space as if it were theirs. Your routine, even if it seems simple, is a structure of stability. The time you eat breakfast, the way you organize your things when you rest, the volume you can tolerate, the silence you need, how the bathroom, the kitchen, the television, the front door, and the phone are used. All of that, which to others may look like fussiness, is actually what holds your balance together, and the older you get, the more important it becomes. Not because you have become rigid, but because peace no longer depends on big dreams, but on small daily harmonies. You are not in a season of life to negotiate with just anyone. Marcus Aurelius, who had an entire empire on his shoulders and still understood the inner battle better than most, reminded himself that the soul takes on the color of its thoughts. Now translate that into real coexistence. If you live with someone who interrupts, disrupts, criticizes, dramatizes, and brings tension into every corner, your mind ends up breathing that same atmosphere. The house stops being a refuge and becomes a factory of irritation. And no one ages well inside that kind of environment, no matter how family-like it may look from the outside. It helps to look less at what a person says, and much more at how they react when you set a small boundary. That is the real test. Tell them you prefer a certain hour to rest. Ask them not to enter your room without knocking. Make it clear that certain decisions about the house are yours to make. Then watch. Do they understand with maturity, or do they get offended like a frustrated teenager? Do they respect it, or do they begin negotiating your boundary as if it were just a suggestion? Because someone who cannot tolerate small boundaries will walk all over the big ones tomorrow. It is that simple, that inelegant. And do not confuse trust with total access. That mistake has destroyed more peace than bad luck ever did. There are children, nieces, nephews, friends, and even new partners who believe that emotional closeness gives them permission to enter every part of your life. Your drawers, your accounts, your schedule, your decisions, your silences. as if loving you gave them a license to manage you. It does not. Affection does not buy invisible keys to your life. Respect opens doors. Invasion deserves a lock. Halfway through, it is worth asking yourself something uncomfortable. Are you choosing someone who respects you, or someone who simply does not abandon you? Because those are not the same thing. There are people who stay close not out of consideration, but out of convenience, habit, or control. And because they are there, we convince ourselves that it is enough. But presence without respect wears you down more than absence does. What is the point of having someone in your home if keeping them there means staying quiet, shrinking yourself and giving in until you lose your shape? That is not coexistence. That is an occupation of territory with domestic manners. Respect for your boundaries also includes something almost no one mentions: your right to remain a complete person, not an adult reduced to a function. You are not at this stage to become a babysitter for grandchildren, a driver for favors, the emotional support system for disorganized relatives, or an ATM with a pulse. If someone comes to live with you, they must understand that you do not disappear to make room for them. Your life does not become secondary. Your history, your habits, and your way of being in the world still carry weight, a great deal of weight. So do not choose the person who flatters you most, or the one who insists the hardest. Choose the one who knows how to be present without invading, help without controlling, accompany without absorbing. Because with age, good coexistence does not look like a soap opera full of endless hugs. It looks more like a sober architecture where each person can breathe without crushing the other. And that, even if it sounds less emotional, is infinitely more valuable. Especially when what is at stake is not some fantasy of companionship, but your daily peace. 4. Consider living with a child only if there is reciprocity, clear agreements, and respect. This is one of the most delicate topics because it touches deep emotions, old guilt, real affection, and a fairly wide collection of family self-deceptions. Many people assume that living with a child in old age is automatically the most logical, warmest, and safest option. As if blood ties magically solved problems of daily coexistence. They do not. Blood connects people, yes, but it does not organize them, mature them, or correct bad habits. Sometimes it does not even guarantee respect. Living with a child can be a good decision, but only when reciprocity exists. In other words, when the relationship is not built on one-sided sacrifice, emotional manipulation, or dependency disguised as family love. If you open up your house, your time, your routine, and part of your privacy, there must also be a concrete response from the other side. Not nice words, not promises, not sweet scenes during the first month. A real response. Cooperation, consideration, responsibility, respect for your authority within your own space, and a sincere willingness to build a healthy living arrangement. Because there are wonderful, mature, grateful children, and there are also children who, without being monsters, carry an uncomfortable mix of habit, immaturity, and convenience. They arrive saying they want to help you, but within a few weeks they have already disrupted the house, added expenses, brought in problems, and left you managing the tension. And because they are your children, it hurts more to complain. That is where the trap begins. You confuse love with endless obligation. You confuse patience with resignation. You confuse being a parent with having to tolerate anything for the rest of your days. Musonius Rufus, Epictetus's teacher and a man sober enough to understand life without decoration, insisted that human relationships only function well when they are guided by virtue and mutual duty, not by whim. And that applies perfectly here. An adult child cannot live with you as if they were still 15 and you were still the logistical center of their existence. Not anymore. That stage is over. If they are going to share a roof with you again, it has to be from adulthood, not from the endless comfort of the child who assumes you will solve whatever is missing because you always have. Clear agreements are essential. Who pays for what? Which spaces are private? Which decisions must be discussed? Which routines are to be respected? Which visitors are allowed? What happens if the arrangement stops working? Yes, it sounds unromantic. Good. That is exactly why it works better. Families who avoid these conversations because they are afraid of seeming cold end up piling up hot resentment. And then everyone suffers, everyone complains behind each other's backs, and no one understands how something that began with good intentions ended up smelling like exhaustion and obligation. At this point, it helps to ask a question many people avoid because they are ashamed of the answer. Does your child want to live with you, to share life with you, or to solve their own life through you? That difference changes everything. Because one thing is honest closeness, and something very different is using a parent's home as a practical cushion, a daycare center, an economic refuge, or an emotional gas station. And yes, sometimes the child is not even doing it out of malice. They do it from that mixture of habit and blindness that comes from always having been taken care of. But the fact that it is not malicious does not mean it does not wear you down. You also have to look at something even harder. Can you live with that actual child, not with the idea you have of them? Because family fantasy deceives people a lot. We remember the affectionate child, the teenager who used to hug us, the young person who promised to always be there. But today you are not living with a memory. You are living with a real adult, with their current temperament, their present habits, maybe their partner, maybe their children, their tensions, their frustrations, and the concrete way they treat you when no one else is watching. That is the person you are going to share a roof with, not the idealized version you still hold in your heart. And this is where respect comes in, the cornerstone of everything. A child can love you deeply and still not know how to live with you. They can feel grateful and still be invasive, messy, or controlling. Love helps, yes, but it does not replace respect. Respect shows itself when they do not infantilize you, when they do not speak to you as if you were incapable, when they do not make decisions for you without asking, when they do not take over the house, and when they understand that helping you does not make them the moral owner of your life. That difference is enormous. There is something almost ridiculous in many families. The father or mother worked for decades, built the home, carried the family through crises, raised the children, and paid the bills, only to end up asking permission at their own table so as not to bother anyone. That reversal of roles, when it becomes humiliating, is not love. It is emotional disorder decorated as family. That is why, if you're going to live with a child, it should come from clarity, not guilt. From agreement, not assumption. From mutual respect, not from the old habit of simply putting up with things. When those three things are present, reciprocity, clear agreements, and respect, living together can be a quiet blessing. It can bring real support, clean companionship, and a sense of a safety net that relieves without suffocating. But when they are missing, what looked like a solution turns into a slow kind of wear and tear that is hard to stop because it comes wrapped in shared last names, memories, and tears. And that is exactly why you need to think more clearly than ever. Because loving a child does not obligate you to live badly with them. 5. Avoid living with relatives who use you as a service, a bank, or a full-time caregiver. This point makes people uncomfortable, and that is exactly why it needs to be faced head-on. Because one of the bitterest traps of old age is not loneliness, but exploitation disguised as family closeness. There are relatives who do not come near you to build a dignified life with you. They come near because you are useful to them. You make life easier for them, lower their expenses, watch their children, hold their routines together, lend them money, absorb their problems, and on top of that, you offer that dangerous mix of shelter, patience, and guilt that so many older adults carry as if it were some sacred obligation. And the hardest part is that many times you do not see it at first, or you do not want to see it, because of course you tell yourself that family is family, that you have to help, that one day for you, one day for me, that lending a hand is no big deal. The problem is they are not asking for a hand. They take your whole arm, then your schedule, then your peace of mind, and in the end, your house. And when you try to reclaim a little breathing room, suddenly you are selfish, cold, dramatic, or ungrateful. How curious. While you keep giving, you are noble. The moment you set a boundary, you become the villain. This is where you need to learn to tell the difference between healthy coexistence and a parasitic dynamic. In healthy coexistence, there is exchange, consideration, mutual help, and respect for your stage of life. In a parasitic dynamic, there is constant demand, little gratitude, endless assumption, and an almost artistic ability to make you feel guilty if you stop being available. One day you do a favor. The next day they already expect it to be your job. One month you help financially, and the next month it is already included in the family's moral budget. Suddenly your time is not yours, your home is treated like common property, and your energy is being managed from the outside. Seneca said that whoever receives a benefit with gratitude has already begun to repay it. And that simple idea works as an almost foolproof detector. Watch whether that relative truly acknowledges what you do, whether they repay it with actions, whether they take care of what they receive, whether they behave with consideration. Because real gratitude does not need long speeches. You can see it in behavior. But when all you find is entitlement, habit, and automatic expectation, then you are no longer looking at a supportive relationship. You are looking at a quiet takeover. Some relatives turn the older adult into domestic help with an emotional license. Because you are at home, they assume you can cook, receive packages, watch the grandchildren, wait for repair workers, open the door, do a little laundry, keep an eye on the child for a while, run a quick errand, stay a little longer. That little while then becomes routine. That routine becomes duty. And your day, which should be better protected by now, ends up kidnapped by other people's needs. The worst part is that all of this usually happens without any obvious bad intention, which is the perfect fuel for everyday abuse. No one yells, no one threatens, they just occupy your life in installments. Then there is the role of emotional bank, which carries a special kind of cruelty. They ask for help because of an emergency, a transition, just this once, for a couple of weeks, for something specific. And you understand, because life squeezes hard sometimes. But when the exception becomes the structure, and you keep financing other people's stability at the expense of your own, you are no longer helping. You are sustaining a dependency that wears you down. And do you know what happens then? Your old age stops being organized around your well-being and starts revolving around other people's inability to take responsibility for themselves. In the middle of this subject, there is a question worth gold. Are they looking for you out of love or out of usefulness? It hurts to ask it, but it hurts more to live without answering it. Because there are people who call you, include you, visit you, and keep you in mind as long as you remain useful. The moment you stop solving, lending, caring, or giving in, the warmth cools off with suspicious speed. That is when the set falls apart. That is when you discover that you were not so much loved as convenient, and that revelation, bitter as it is, also has something liberating about it. At least now you know where you stand. Epictetus insisted on something essential. Remember your role, but do not perform someone else's. In other words, fulfill with dignity what belongs to you, but do not take on responsibilities born from someone else's irresponsibility. You can be generous without becoming a servant. You can be supportive without turning into a permanent safety net. You can love your family without mortgaging your health, your money, and your final years to cover burdens that were never yours. That balance does not make you harsh. It makes you fair. There is a sad kind of sarcasm in seeing older people who could finally be resting a little, only to end up more exhausted than when they worked full-time. Before, they had bosses. Now they have relatives. Before, they earned a paycheck. Now they pay to work emotionally for other people. And on top of that, they are supposed to feel grateful because the house is full. No, thank you. A house full of demands is not always a house full of love. Sometimes it is just full of noise, dependency, and opportunism. That is why you should avoid living with relatives who use you as a service, a bank, or a full-time caregiver. Not because family does not matter, but precisely because it matters too much to let it rot inside unfair relationships. Living together is only worthwhile when it does not drain you, when it does not reduce you, when it does not turn you into a resource. You have already given plenty in life. This stage should not be about continuing to carry everyone else. It should be about finally learning not to carry what was never yours. Six, do not confuse need with love. Look at late-life relationships with a clear head and firm rules. This subject deserves a special kind of honesty because it touches one of the most vulnerable parts of being human, the need for affection as the years go by and the world grows quieter. And yes, love can show up late. Genuine companionship can arrive when you thought that door had already closed. There can still be tenderness, desire, conversation, closeness, and that beautiful feeling of sharing the day with someone again. All of that is real. The problem begins when you fail to distinguish between a genuine bond and an emotional arrangement born from the fear of growing old alone. There are people who, after 60, do not fall in love with someone. They fall in love with relief, with the message that comes through, with the voice that calls at night, with the presence that distracts them from the emptiness, with the fantasy of starting over without looking too closely at the cost. And that is where serious mistakes can happen, because when emotional hunger takes the lead, reason tends to stay at the door like a guest no one let in. Then you idealize quickly, share too soon, give up too much, and confuse intensity with compatibility. This is not about becoming suspicious to the point of paranoia, or shutting yourself off from affection as if feeling were foolish. It is about maturing in love too. It means understanding that at this age, a partner is not chosen only for chemistry, companionship, or emotion. They are also chosen for habits, values, respect, stability, how they handle conflict, their relationship with money, and their ability to live with someone without invading them. Because you are no longer in a season for endless trial runs or teenage drama in an adult body. You are no longer here for the kind of romance that throws your home, your finances, and your peace of mind into chaos in exchange for 2 weeks of euphoria. Marcus Aurelius, who knew quite a bit about human desire even if he did not live like a character in a novel, warned that you should always look at the true nature of things. That applies to late-life relationships too. Look at what it is, not what you hope it will be. Look at how they live, how they spend, how they speak when frustrated, how they treat your boundaries, how they talk about their exes, how they react to your decisions, how they position themselves around your assets, your family, and your independence. Because the problem is not loving someone. The problem is projecting onto another person a rescue they never promised. In the middle of this reflection, it helps to ask yourself an uncomfortable question. Are you attracted to that person, or do they simply calm your panic about being alone? It sounds like a subtle difference, but it can separate a beautiful relationship from a well-perfumed disaster. And even more than that, does this person want you, or do they want the place you occupy, the house you have, the security you represent, the order you provide? Yes, I know that sounds harsh, but emotional naivety is expensive at any age, and in old age it is usually even more expensive because it puts at risk exactly what you most need to protect. Late-life relationships need firm rules, not because rules kill romance, but because they bring it down to earth. Talk about money, talk about inheritance, talk about living arrangements, talk about expenses, space, privacy, expectations, illness, future support. Even talk about what would happen if the relationship changes or ends. Adults who avoid these conversations for fear of ruining the magic usually end up ruining themselves later. Magic that cannot survive a serious conversation was never that solid. It was only a pleasant fog. The irony here is brutal. There are people who would never sign a contract without reading it, yet they hand over their home, their routine, and their assets to a newly arrived relationship with moving faith and terrible judgment, all because they felt understood, seen, desired. And of course that matters. Of course it stirs something deep. But feeling alive should not push you into living worse. Emotion needs structure. Affection needs boundaries. Hope, if it wants to last without destroying you, needs a little coldness in the head. Musonius Rufus held that good love strengthens character and directs us toward a more virtuous life. What a simple and useful idea. A worthy partner does not push you to become more dependent, hide things, betray your principles, or throw your priorities into disorder. On the contrary, they make you clearer, calmer, more whole. If a relationship fills you with anxiety, confusion, financial pressure, guilt, or a constant sense that you are losing your center, then maybe it is not mature love. Maybe it is need dressed up with pretty words and pleasant dinners. This does not mean giving up on love in old age. It means honoring it enough not to degrade it by turning it into a desperate refuge. You can open the door of your heart without leaving the gate to your entire life wide open. You can love without merging. You can share without leaving yourself unprotected. You can build something new without betraying yourself. But for that, you have to look calmly, ask bravely, and set rules without shame. Because a late-life relationship can be a gift or an elegant problem. It can bring clean companionship, sincere tenderness, and shared meaning. or it can settle in as a badly misunderstood mutual need that at first feels like relief, and in the end looks far too much like chaos. And at this point in life, you do not need any more chaos with background music. You need bonds that add to your life, not drain it. That is why you must not confuse need with love. The heart may open, yes, but do not let your hand, your home, and your judgment open all at once. 7. Put agreements in writing and protect your assets, your space, and your peace of mind. This is where many people get nervous because they feel that writing things down somehow cools a relationship, as if making things clear were an insult or a declaration of distrust. But no. What cools a relationship is not clarity. What rots it is ambiguity. What destroys families is rarely a page of well-thought-out rules. It is usually the chaos of what was never said, what was assumed, what was improvised, and what was misunderstood, which over time turns into resentment, abuse, or open conflict. When you share a home at this stage of life, good intentions are not enough. Good intentions are enough to begin. What sustains a living arrangement is structure, who lives there and under what conditions, which expenses belong to each person, which spaces are private, which boundaries are not to be crossed, which belongings are not to be touched, what kind of support is offered and what kind is not, what happens if one person gets sick, what happens if someone wants to bring another person into the house, what happens if the living arrangement stops working. All of that needs to exist clearly, not as a loose conversation over coffee, but as a conscious agreement and, when necessary, in writing. Because emotional memory has a curious flaw. Each person remembers what suits them best. You think you were perfectly clear. The other person swears they understood something different. Months go by, a conflict appears, and suddenly everyone reconstructs the past in the version that works best for them. That is when the poisonous phrases begin. I thought that. You never said. It was understood that. I was led to believe. And just like that, the circus is up and running. A very exhausting circus too, because at a certain age, arguing over obvious things does not just wear you out, it humiliates you. Protecting your assets is not greed. It is responsibility. You have worked too many years, paid too many bills, and weathered too many storms to start acting now like a naive soul charmed by closeness. Your house, your savings, your furniture, your documents, your legal decisions, and your inheritance are not side issues. They are part of your practical dignity. And yes, even if some people do not like hearing it, people change when money, property, or the possibility of inheritance enters the picture. Sometimes even the person who swore they never would. Heracles, one of those less quoted but very lucid Stoics, understood that life in community requires clear duties and well-ordered circles. It is not about closing your heart, but about putting everything in its proper place. That applies perfectly here. Your assets are within your circle of responsibility. Taking care of them does not make you stingy. It makes you serious. Stoicism was never about letting people walk all over you while you smile like a sage. It was about knowing what depends on you and acting rightly toward it. And protecting what is yours depends on you. In the middle of this point, it helps to ask yourself something you may not like, but that will help you. Are you embarrassed to put an agreement in writing because you fear seeming harsh, or because deep down, you know the other person might get upset when they realize they do not have a free hand? That discomfort already tells you a lot. Someone with clean intentions may be surprised, but they understand. Someone who expected to move around in the fog gets irritated. Why? Because clarity cuts off their room to take up more than they should, weigh in more than they should, or keep what was never theirs. And this is not only about money, it is also about your space and your peace of mind. There are people who do not necessarily want your belongings, but they do want to colonize your pace of life. To install their habits, impose their routines, use common areas as if they were their own, decide for you what they think is best. That is why agreements must also include what cannot be touched, but can still be invaded. Silence, routines, schedules, visits, order, privacy. The right to be alone without having to explain yourself. The right to close a door without anyone taking offense as if you had thrown them out of the kingdom. It is also wise to protect yourself legally when the situation calls for it. Documents, authorizations, a will, usufruct rights, powers of attorney, living conditions, anything that brings clarity. There is no need to live in paranoia or turn your house into a law office. But there is a need to stop acting as if affection can replace prudence. It cannot. It never could. In fact, the more important a relationship is, the more it needs structure in order not to become poisoned. Limitless love may be moving in the movies. In real life, it usually ends in lawsuits, long silences, and faces saying, "That is not what I wanted." There is a rather bitter irony in all of this. Some people feel guilty for asking for order, but then they end up crying in a lawyer's office, arguing with relatives, or watching their own peace slip through their hands simply because they did not want to seem distrustful. What a strange kind of goodness that is. The kind that demands you leave yourself unprotected so others can feel comfortable. No. Goodness without judgment is an open door to abuse, and at this stage of life you should not still be decorating abuse with good manners. So make things clear. Put them in writing when necessary. Protect what you built. Protect your space. Protect your peace of mind. Not to live in fear, but to live with order. Because peace is not preserved by good intentions alone. It is also preserved by visible boundaries, firm decisions, and the healthy habit of not leaving loose ends for others to tie around you later. 8. Prepare to live with yourself and become your own best company without fear. We have reached the point many people avoid because it touches the root of the problem. You can analyze children, relatives, partners, agreements, assets, and living arrangements all you want. But if you do not learn how to be with yourself, you will keep making decisions out of fear. And someone who is afraid of their own company is very easy to push into relationships, living arrangements, and compromises that do not serve them. Because when silence scares you, any presence looks like a solution. And no, not every presence saves you. Some destroy the little that was still in order. There are people who do not urgently need to live with someone. They need to make peace with themselves. They need to stop looking at solitude as if it were a sentence and start seeing it as a space that can also have dignity, rhythm, depth, and even pleasure. Yes, pleasure. Because living with yourself does not have to feel like an empty room waiting for visitors. It can feel like a life where you decide your own time, care for your body, choose your routines, organize your home your way, think calmly. Read, walk, pray, remember, breathe, and stop depending on other people's noise to feel that you exist. That does not mean isolating yourself from the world, or turning into some dry stone that despises every bond. It means something much healthier. It means companionship stops being a crutch and becomes a choice. You no longer open the door because you are terrified by the echo in the hallway. You open it only if the person entering improves the inner home it took you so much effort to build. And if they do not improve it, they do not come in. Look how simple that is. Look how revolutionary that is for so many who spent their lives accepting emotional scraps just so they would not feel alone on a Saturday afternoon. Epictetus taught that no one is free who does not govern himself. What an uncomfortable and useful line. Because the fear of being alone is, in the end, a form of inner slavery. It makes you dependent on messages, company, validation, outside movement. And that is how you end up handing your peace over to anyone who promises presence. But when you learn to govern yourself, something changes. Solitude stops being a threat and becomes your own ground. You no longer beg for closeness. You select your relationships. This takes practice, of course. It does not happen through an inspiring quote or one enthusiastic afternoon. The soul must be trained, just as the body is trained. You have to learn to enjoy order. Learn to hold silence without rushing to fill every gap. Learn to speak to yourself with less harshness. Learn to make your house a place that is livable for you, not just presentable to others. Because let us be honest, there are people who have spent years not knowing how to be with themselves. They turn something on, call someone, look for noise, get busy with other people, anything before sitting down to inhabit their own life. There is a question here worth more than many pieces of advice. Are you afraid of being alone, or are you afraid of meeting yourself without distractions? Because those are not exactly the same thing. Sometimes we are not running from the absence of others. We are running from unfinished inner accounts, unresolved resentment, old sadness, the feeling that we have not chosen ourselves enough. And of course, as long as that remains unexamined, every living arrangement will carry a trace of escape. You will seek people not to share but not to feel, and that always ends up making everything more complicated. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that at any moment, you can retreat into yourself. He was not talking about disappearing from the world, but about having an inner refuge available. That is what you need to cultivate, an inner place where you can rest without depending on someone sitting on the other side of the couch. A space where calm is not borrowed, where dignity does not depend on being needed by someone else, where your worth does not rise or fall depending on whether the house is full or empty. That kind of strength is not improvised, but it can be built. And here comes a little irony worth accepting. You spent decades solving life, working, raising children, enduring, caring, pleasing, adapting. And now, of all times, you are going to act as if you cannot spend time with yourself without falling apart. Come on, you have faced far worse things than that. The truth is, no one taught you that you could also be good company for yourself. You were taught to serve, to respond, to be available, but not to inhabit yourself with ease, not to respect yourself in silence, not to enjoy your own presence without apology. When you reach that point, everything changes. You no longer choose from fear, you choose from clarity. You no longer cling to whoever is there, because you discover that being alone and at peace is worth far more than being accompanied and drained. You no longer confuse urgency with love, invasion with closeness, or dependence with care. You become freer, calmer, and paradoxically, also more capable of loving well, because you no longer look to someone else to complete you, but to share a life you already learned how to sustain. Prepare to live with yourself. Make peace with your own presence. Become your own best company without fear. Because when a person stops running from themselves, they finally begin choosing other people well. And in old age, that is no small skill. It is a form of everyday salvation. In the end, the most important decision is not who you are going to live with, but from what place you are going to choose. If you choose from fear, you will end up opening the door to just anyone, and in old age that becomes very expensive. But if you choose from clarity, from respect for your peace, your independence, and your dignity, then everything changes. You no longer look to fill a void at any cost. You begin building a life where company only has value if it protects your stability instead of devouring it. Now it is your turn to do something many people keep putting off until it is too late. Look at your reality without makeup, your house, your temperament, your health, your money, your boundaries, your relationships, and that uncomfortable truth you already know, even if sometimes you would rather not name it. Because this is not about living with someone out of habit, guilt, or emotional need. It is about not handing over your final years to a living arrangement that takes away what you most need to preserve. And if you understood that today, then you have already taken a step many people never dare to take. Stop begging for company and start choosing peace. If this video stirred something inside you, subscribe to the channel and stay with me on this path, because we are not here to put consciousness to sleep, we are here to wake it up. And in the comments, write this phrase, "I choose my peace," to make it clear that you are not going to keep giving away your peace of mind out of fear of being alone. I also want to hear what country you are watching from, because this community is full of people learning to set boundaries, recover their dignity, and live more truthfully, no matter what corner of the world they are in. I am Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. Right now, 2 recommended videos are going to appear on your screen so you can keep going deeper into this process and not be left with only the emotion of the moment, but turn it into judgment and character. Choose one and keep going, because old age is not defended with illusions. It is defended with clarity, with boundaries, and with the courage never to betray yourself again.